history and ASMR fans. Today we are carrying on as requested with some Greek mythology reading to you. Now before you fall asleep, please do like the video and subscribe to the channel. And let's get going. We got to Prometheus. At the time of the creation, after covering the newborn earth with luxuriant vegetation and peopling it with living creatures of all kinds, Eros perceived that it would be necessary to endow them with instincts which would enable them to preserve and enjoy the life they had received. He therefore called the youngest two sons of Aeptus to his aid, and bade them make a judicious distribution of gifts to all living creatures, and create and endow a superior being called man to rule over all the others. Prometheus's and Epimetheus's first care was, very naturally, to provide for the beings already created. These they endowed with such reckless generosity that all their favours were soon dispensed, and none remained for the endowment of man. Although they had not the remotest idea how to overcome this difficulty, they proceeded to fashion man from clay. They first moulded an image similar in form to the gods, bade Eros breathe into its nostrils the spirit of life, and Athene endow it with a soul, whereupon man lived and moved and viewed his new domain. Justly proud of his handiwork, Prometheus observed man, and longed to bestow upon him some great power, unshared by any other creature of mortal birth, which would raise him far above all other living beings, and bring him nearer to the perfection of the immortal gods. Fire alone, in his estimation, could effect this. But fire was the special possession and prerogative of the gods, and Prometheus knew they would never willingly share it with man, and that, should any one obtain it by stealth, they would never forgive the thief. Long he pondered the matter, and finally determined to obtain fire or die in the attempt. One dark night, therefore, he set out for Olympus, entered unperceived into the god's abode, seized a lighted brand, hid it in his bosom, and departed unseen, exultating in the success of his enterprise. Arrived upon earth once more, he consigned the stolen treasure to the care of man, who immediately adapted it to various purposes, and eloquently expressed his gratitude to the benevolent deity who had risked his own life to obtain it for him. From his lofty throne, on the topmost peak of Mount Olympus, Zeus beheld an unusual light down upon earth. Anxious to ascertain its exact nature, he watched it closely, and before long discovered the larceny. His anger then burst forth, terrible to behold, and the gods all quailed when they heard him solemnly vow he would punish the unhappy Prometheus without mercy. To seize the offender in his mighty grasp, bear him off to the Caucasian mountains, and bind him fast to a great rock, was but a moment's work. There a ferocious vulture was summoned to feast upon his liver, the tearing of which from his side by the bird's cruel beak and talons caused the sufferer intense anguish. All day long the vulture gorged himself, but during the cool night, while the bird slept, Prometheus's suffering abated, and the liver grew again, thus prolonging the torture, which bade fair to have no end. Disheartened by the prospect of long years of unremitting pain, Prometheus at times could not refrain from pitiful complaints, but generation after generation of men lived on earth and died, blessing him for the gift he had obtained for them at such a terrible cost. After many centuries of woe, Hercules, son of Zeus and Alcmene, found Prometheus, killed the vulture, broke the adamantine chains, and liberated the long-suffering god. The first mortals lived on earth in a state of perfect innocence and bliss. The air was pure and balmy, the sun shone brightly all the year, the earth brought forth delicious fruit in abundance, and beautiful fragrant flowers bloomed everywhere. Man was content. Extreme cold, hunger, sickness, and death were unknown. Zeus, who justly ascribed a good part of this beatific condition to the gift conferred by Prometheus, was greatly displeased, and tried to devise some means to punish mankind for the acceptance of heavenly fire. With this purpose in view, he assembled the gods on Mount Olympus, where, in solemn council, they decided to create a woman, and, As soon as she had been artfully fashioned, each one endowed her with some special charm to make her more attractive. Their united efforts were crowned with the utmost success. Nothing was lacking, except a name for the peerless creature, and the gods, after due consideration, decreed she should be called Pandora. They then bade Hermes take her to Prometheus as a gift from heaven, but he, knowing only too well that nothing good would come to him from the gods, refused to accept her, and cautioned his brother Epimetheus to follow his example. Unfortunately, Epimetheus was of a confiding disposition, and when he beheld the maiden, he exclaimed, "Surely so beautiful and gentle a being can bring no evil," and accepted her most joyfully. The first days of their union were spent in blissful wanderings, hand in hand, under the cool forest shade, in weaving garlands of fragrant flowers, and in refreshing themselves with the luscious fruit which hung so temptingly within reach. And now we have Pandora. One lovely evening, while dancing on the green, they saw Hermes, Zeus's messenger, coming towards them. His step was slow and weary, his garments dusty and travel-stained, and he seemed almost to stagger beneath the weight of a huge box which rested upon his shoulders. Pandora immediately ceased dancing to speculate with feminine curiosity upon the contents of the chest. She nudged Epimetheus, and in a whisper begged him to ask Hermes what brought him thither. Such a good word, thither. Epimetheus complied with her request, but Hermes evaded the question, asked permission to deposit his burden in their dwelling for safekeeping, professing himself too weary to convey it to its destination that day, and promised to call for it shortly. The permission was promptly granted. Hermes, with a sigh of relief, placed the box in one corner, and then departed, refusing all hospitable offers of rest and refreshment. He had scarcely crossed the threshold when Pandora expressed a strong desire to have a peep at the contents of the mysterious box, but Epimetheus, surprised and shocked, told her that her curiosity was unseemly, and then, to dispel the frown and pout seen for the first time on the fair face of his beloved, he entreated her to come out into the fresh air and join in the merry games of their companions. For the first time, also, Pandora refused to comply with his request. Dismayed and very much discouraged, Epimetheus sauntered out alone, thinking she would soon join him, and perhaps by some careless atone for her present wilfulness. Left alone with the mysterious casket, Pandora became more and more inquisitive. Stealthily she drew near, and examined it with great interest, for it was curiously wrought of dark wood, and surmounted by a delicately carved head of such fine workmanship that it seemed to smile and encourage her. Around the box a glittering golden cord was found, and fastened on top in an intricate knot. Pandora, who prided herself specially on her deft fingers, felt sure she could unfasten it, and, reasoning that it would not be indiscreet to untie it if she did not raise the lid, she set to work. Long she strove, but all in vain. Ever and anon the laughing voices of Epimetheus and his companions, playing in the luxuriant shade, were wafted in on the summer breeze. Repeatedly she heard them call, and beseech her to join them, yet she persisted in her attempt. She was just on the point of giving up in despair when suddenly the refractory knot yielded to her fumbling fingers, and the cord, unrolling, dropped to the floor. Pandora had repeatedly fancied that sounds like whispered issued from the box. The noise now seemed to increase, and she breathlessly applied her ear to the lid to ascertain whether it really proceeded from within. Imagine, therefore, her surprise when she distinctly heard these words, uttered in the most pitiful accents. "Pandora, dear Pandora, have pity upon us. Free us from this gloomy prison. Open, open, we beseech you." Pandora's heart beat so fast and loud that it seemed for a moment to drown all other sounds. Should she open the box? Just then a familiar step outside made her start guiltily. Epimetheus was coming, and she knew he would urge her again to come out, and would prevent the gratification of her curiosity. Precipitately, therefore, she raised the lid to have one little peep before he came in. Now, Zeus had malignantly crammed into this box all the diseases, sorrows, vices, and crimes that afflict poor humanity, and the box was no sooner opened than all these ills flew out, in the guise of horrid little brown winged creatures, closely resembling moths. These little insects fluttered about, alighting, some upon Epimetheus, who had just entered, and some upon Pandora, pricking and stinging them most unmercifully. Then they flew out through the open door and windows, and fastened upon the merrymakers without, whose shouts of joy were soon changed into wails of pain and anguish. Epimetheus and Pandora had never before experienced the faintest sensation of pain or anger, but as soon as these winged evil spirits had stung them, they began to weep, and, alas, quarrelled for the first time in their lives. Epimetheus reproached his wife in bitterest terms for her thoughtless action, but in the very midst of his vituperation he suddenly heard a sweet little voice entreat for freedom. The sound proceeded from the unfortunate box, whose cover Pandora had dropped again, in the first moment of her surprise and pain. "Open, open, and I will heal your wounds. Please let me out," it pleaded. The tearful couple viewed each other inquiringly and listened again. Once more they heard the same pitiful accents, and Epimetheus bade his wife open the box and set the speaker free, adding very amiably that she had already done so much harm by her ill-fated curiosity that it would be difficult to add materially to its evil consequences, and that, perchance, the box contained some good spirit whose ministrations might prove beneficial. It was well for Pandora that she opened the box a second time, for the gods, with a sudden impulse of compassion, had concealed among the evil spirits one kindly creature, Hope, whose mission was to heal the wounds inflicted by her fellow prisoners. Lightly fluttering hither and thither on her snowy pinions, Hope touched the punctured places on Pandora and Epimetheus's creamy skin, and relieved their suffering, then quickly flew out of the open window to perform the same gentle office for the other victims, and cheer their downcast spirits. Thus, according to the ancients, evil entered into the world, bringing untold misery. But Hope followed closely in its footsteps to aid struggling humanity, and point to a happier future. During many centuries, therefore, Hope continued to be revered, although the other divinities had ceased to be worshipped. According to another version, Pandora was sent down to man, bearing a vase in which the evil spirits were imprisoned, and on the way, seized by a fit of curiosity, raised the cover, and allowed them all to escape. And now we come to the Great Deluge. Actually, I think it's deluge rather than deluge, so apologies for saying that a bit weird just then. The Great Deluge, I think. Little by little, the world was peopled, and the first years of man's existence upon earth were, as we have seen, years of unalloyed happiness. There was no occasion for labour, for the earth brought forth spontaneously all that was necessary for man's subsistence. Innocence, virtue, and truth prevailed, neither were there any laws to restrict men, nor judges to punish. This time of bliss was justly borne the title of Golden Age, and the people in Italy then throve under the wise rule of good old Saturn or Cronus. Unfortunately, nothing in this world is lasting, and the Golden Age was followed by another, not quite so prosperous, hence called the Silver Age, where the year was first divided into seasons, and men were obliged to toil for their daily bread. Yet, in spite of these few hardships, the people were happy, far happier than their descendants during the Age of Brass, which speedily followed, when strife became customary, and differences were settled by blows. But by far the worst of all was the Iron Age, when men's passions knew no bounds, and they even dared refuse all homage to the immortal gods. War was waged incessantly, the earth was saturated with blood, the rights of hospitality were openly violated, and murder and theft were committed on all sides. Zeus had kept a close watch over men's actions during all these years, and the evil conduct aroused his wrath to such a point that he vowed he would annihilate the human race. But the modes of destruction were manifold, and, as he could not decide which would eventually prove most efficacious, he summoned the gods to deliberate and aid him by their counsels. The first suggestion offered was to destroy the world by fire, kindled by Zeus's much dreaded thunderbolts, and the king of the gods was about to put it into instant execution, when his arm was stayed by the objection that the raising flames might set fire to his own abode, and reduce its magnificence to unsightly ashes. He therefore rejected the plan as impractical, and bade the gods devise other means of destruction. After much delay and discussion, the immortals agreed to wash mankind off the face of the earth by mighty deluge. I've done it again, deluge. The winds were instructed to gather together the rain clouds over the earth. Poseidon let loose the waves of the sea, bidding them rise, overflow, and deluge the land. No sooner had the gods spoken than the elements obeyed. The winds blew, the rain fell in torrents, lakes, sea, rivers, and oceans broke their bonds, and terrified mortals, forgetting their petty quarrels in a common impulse to flee from the death which threatened them, climbed the highest mountains, clung to uprooted trees, and even took refuge in the light skiffs they had constructed in happier days. Their efforts were all in vain, however, for the waters rose higher and higher, overtook them one after another in their ineffectual efforts to escape, closed over the homes where they might have been so happy, and drowned their last despairing cries in their seething depths. The rain continued to fall, until after many days the waves covered all the surface of the earth except the summit of Mount Parnassus, the highest peak in Greece. On this mountain, surrounded by the ever-rising flood, stood the son of Prometheus, Deucalion, with his faithful wife, Pyrrha, a daughter of Epimetheus and Pandora. So cousins. Yeah. From hence they, sole survivors, viewed the universal desolation with tear-rimmed eyes. In spite of the general depravity, the lives of this couple had always been pure and virtuous, and when Zeus saw them there alone, and remembered their piety, he decided not to include them in the general destruction, but to save their lives. He therefore bade the winds return to their cave, and the rain to cease. Poseidon, in accordance with his decree, blew a resounding blast upon his conch shell to recall the wandering waves, which immediately returned within their usual bounds. Deucalion and Pyrrha followed the receding waves step by step down the steep mountain side, wondering how they could repeople the desolate earth. As they talked, they came to the shrine of Delphi, which alone had been able to resist the force of the waves. There they entered to consult the wishes of the gods. Their surprise and horror were unbounded, however, when a voice exclaimed, "Depart from hence with veiled heads, and cast your mother's bones behind you." To obey such a command seemed sacrilegious in the extreme, for the dead had always been held in deep veneration by the Greeks, and the desecration of a grave was considered a heinous crime, and punished accordingly. But, they reasoned, the god's oracle can seldom be accepted in a literal sense, and Deucalion, after due thought, explained to Pyrrha what he conceived to be the meaning of this mysterious command. "The earth," said he, "is the mother of all, and the stones may be considered her bones." Husband and wife speedily decided to act upon this premise, and continued their descent, casting stones behind them. All those thrown by Deucalion were immediately changed into men, while those cast by Pyrrha became women. Thus the earth was peopled for the second time with a blameless race of men, sent to replace the wicked beings slain by Zeus. Deucalion and Pyrrha shortly after became the happy parents of a son named Hellen, who gave his name to all the Hellenic or Greek race, while his sons Aeolus and Dorus and grandsons Ionis and Achaeus became the ancestors of the Aeolian, Dorian, Ionian and Achaean nations. Other mythologists, in treating of the Diluvian myths, state that Deucalion and Pyrrha took refuge in an ark, which, after sailing about for many days, was stranded on the top of Mount Parnassus. This version was far less popular with the Greeks, although it betrays still more plainly the common source whence all these myths derived. And that brings us to an end of the first section. That is the foundations of Greek mythology, and next is the major Olympian gods. But that might be another long section, and it might require another video. Let's pick the shortest one. Hestia. Hestia was the daughter of Kronos and Rhea. She was the goddess of fire in its first application to the wants of mankind. Hence she was essentially the presiding deity of the domestic hearth and the guardian spirit of man, and it was her pure and benign influence which was supposed to protect the sanctity of domestic life. Now in these early ages the hearth was regarded as the most important and most sacred portion of the dwelling, probably because the protection of fire was an important consideration, for if once permitted to become extinct, reignition was attended with extreme difficulty. In fact, the hearth was held so sacred that it constituted the sanctum of the family, for which reason it was always erected in the centre of every house. It was a few feet in height and was built of stone. The fire was placed on top of it and served the double purpose of preparing the daily meals and consuming the family's sacrifices. Round this domestic hearth or altar were gathered the various members of the family, the head of the house occupying the place of honour nearest the hearth. Here prayers were said and sacrifices offered, and here also every kind and loving feeling was fostered, which even extended to the hunted and guilty stranger who, if he once succeeded in touching this sacred altar, was safe from pursuit and punishment, and was henceforth placed under the protection of the family. Any crime committed within the sacred precincts of the domestic hearth was invariably visited by death. In Grecian cities there was a common hall, called the Prytaneum, in which the members of the government had their meals at the expense of the state, and here too was the Hestia, or public hearth, with its fire, by means of which those meals were prepared. It was customary for emigrants to take with them a portion of this sacred fire, which they jealously guarded and brought with them to their new home, where it served as a connecting link between the young Greek colony and the mother country. Hestia is generally represented standing, and in accordance with the dignity and sanctity of her character, always appears fully draped. Her countenance is distinguished by a serene gravity of expression. And there are obviously so many other Greek divinities